Take 37. This is the lighting kit I'm using for this project. It's a leftover from the under cabinet lighting I did in my kitchen. This is a halogen bulb set. I know this is going to be more than bright enough for my needs. It is also being mounted up at the top, which is a good 25-30 inches away from the work surface down here at the bottom. Okay, halogen bulbs do put out more heat than some of the other lighting sources you could use, but I don't think that's going to be an issue because it's being mounted up so high away from all my work. Heat rises, you know, and this is a downdraft kit, so all the fumes and everything are being pulled down. So I'm not worried about possible ignition of something I'm working on. All right, I'm going to mount this, then I'm going to put the side rails on the top, then I'm going to mount the top in the cabinet. Once I'm done with that, I have electrical left and finishing the outside the cabinet. I talked about sanding the outside down a little bit to get the edges to match. When I start looking at this, those edges are pretty good to begin with. I'm not going to bother with sanding anything down. I'm just going to finish it. I'm not trying to make a masterpiece cabinet. If I was going to do that, I'd do something very similar to what I did on this aquarium stand over here that I made. Having the lighting come on, where I put edging on it all the way around and tried to do a really good finish on the stand. I'm not trying to do something like that. This is a spray cabinet. I don't think it has to be beautiful. All right, so we're gonna call it quits for this segment. When I come back, I will have mounted the top and I'll talk about how I'm gonna finish it. Once it's finished, then all I have left is electrical. Got the top on. Got the light kit in. The light kit is working. I've already tested it. What I need to do now is finish an electrical and drill a hole for the plug in the back. I'm going to do that in a second. I'm going to run this cord, if it'll cooperate with me, back up like this, down the back, and then through here. My only problem is going to be this corner here. I did not design this thing with a gap for the cord. I forgot that part. I could run the cord out the back and down, but I'd rather it look neat from the back. Again, you can see my edges came out pretty close. They're not perfect. I'm not, ooh, this guy got bad over here. I am not a cabinet maker by profession, okay, nor a carpenter. I'm just the everyday guy who sometimes puts things together made out of wood. A lot of this will clean up when I hit it with some sealer, but again, I'm not going to try to make everything perfect. That was not the goal. The goal was to get this thing built and make it functional. All right, next time you see, oh, last thing, finishing. I'm just going to put some polyurethane on it, probably inside and outside, to make it look pretty and allow the wood to last for a while. And next time you see this, it will have the polyurethane on it. I'm going to put 2 coats. I usually sand between each coat with some steel wool. And when I'm done with that, all I have left is electrical and running the ductwork. Next time you see it, that's what we'll be discussing, electrical and what I plan to do with that. Okay, I'm now going to turn to the electronics. You can see the lights are working, but they're just plugged into the wall right now. They're not wired into any of the switches or anything. Also, you can see just how big this thing's coming out. I did not... It's one thing to put inches on paper, it's another thing to see the thing in person. It's a lot bigger than I expected it to be. You can tell we got a dresser right next to it. And this is a Viper model I made. Just for perspective, it's lost in here. You know, I could put like 8 of them in here and have room for like 4 more. So, I think I may have overdone on the size a little bit. But the reason for that is I wanted to use the same household filters that the same filters as my house uses. Just being a little thrifty there, so I just have to buy 1 filter. Alright, now I'm using these boxes. I went over them earlier. There's 2 cutouts. There's one there and one there for the boxes. For wire, I had a heavy-duty extension cord. You got to ignore the mess in here. I've been moving things around. I'm taking a spare bedroom and turning it into a man cave. And what man cave would not be complete with your own tiki god Easter Island head statue with a Guinness hat on it. Just had to share that. Okay, I'm using a heavy-duty extension cord I cut the end off of. I'm going to thread it through that hole back there. Once I thread it through, I'm going to knot it. Tighten the knot. I'm not going to videotape all this work. It's tedious work, but I'm going to discuss what I'm doing. Pull it through, tighten a knot in it. The reason I'm tying the knot in it is so it can't be pulled back out. I'm going to run that wire for the lamp down the back of the booth. And it turns out that I left enough room in here that's just big enough. This wire sits back there, the filter, and the pegboard for the floor of this work just fine. What I have here are wire staples. They're designed specifically for stapling down wires. I don't know if I'm going to use them. I'll probably use them a little bit on this cord right here. I may or may not use them down in here. I could staple them into that. Okay? I'm not going to staple them into the plywood because they will go almost all the way through the plywood. But I could staple them into the supports I used for joining the body together. Speaking of supports, you can see I left holes in here in the supports for the various ductwork and boxes. Wanted to make sure there was clearance for everything, and there is. Now, for joining the wires, there's a couple of methods. Wire nuts. I thought about using them for a little bit. They will work. They will allow you to pull the connections apart and put them back together again. I'm not a big fan of wire nuts, so I'm not going to use them. I had them from previous project. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to solder them together, and I'm going to use heat shrink tubing around the solder joints so that there is no chance of sparkage between the connections and no shorting. Okay? Now, this is the plug I'm going to use. It's not a standard plug. I wish I bought a standard plug, but I just grabbed one off the shelf without thinking. The reason it's not a standard plug is the standard plug has a screw hole right here for the plug cover. This one doesn't. But it does match the switch I'm using. This is a switch I'm going to use. It's a 3-position switch. So I can control the 3 different things, the lights, the blower motor, and the accessory plug. Okay? So it will control all 3 things. I'm also using this electrical wire. I had it from another project. It was sitting in the garage and has been sitting there for about 8 years. This is solid core wire, which is good for conducting electricity, horrible for working with because it's very, very stiff. This extension cord is pretty stiff too, but it's stranded wire. Stranded wire is usually used in things you want flexible. Solid core is used when you don't want it flexible. We're not going to be moving the wires around in this, so the solid core is going to work just fine. My only concern is there might be too much for this box. Too much of it coming in and out of this box. We will see in a little bit. Okay? And that's pretty much... Oh, I wanted to discuss one last thing. This is a soldering gun. Soldering guns are used for household wiring, automobile wiring. They are not really used for electronics. Okay? I have for a soldering iron for electronics, which is much, much smaller. That one there is just for working with wires like this because the 14 gauge wire is going to require a lot of heat to get the solder to stick to it. I will show a little bit of my soldering when we're putting things together. I'm going to stop and show various pieces of this, spots where I may have trouble with as I'm doing the wiring. One last thing. I am going to use a digital multimeter on part of this because I want to be able to trace continuity and make sure the circuits are working correctly. The only way to do that is with one of these things. This is an expensive model. It's not a cheap one. Problem with cheap ones, well, they'll work, but if you're going to do anything with electronics, a cheap one just isn't going to work for what you're doing. The reason the cheap one won't work is it's going to misread values, all sorts of other things. I have a cheap one I bought initially, and then I found out it wasn't reading things right. So, I still have it. I should throw it in the dustbin, the trash can, whatever you want to call it. That's where it belongs. Okay? So, there's my digital multimeter. This one has a continuity function. Click it over to the continuity function. When the circuit is completed, it beeps and I get a red light. When there is no circuit, I get nothing. So that'll tell me if my soldering is done correctly or not. This is one of the reasons why I'm going to use it. It'll also help me trace the wire paths on my switches and things. What I mean by wire paths on switches is I got a ground and 2 plugs here. Well, I don't know which one's which when I look at this end of the wire. So I'll be able to trace out which one's the ground wire, which one's the hot wire, which one is the negative wire. Most likely, I would say the green is the ground because that's the typical convention, but I don't want to take anything for chance. I want to make sure it's wired correctly. All right, I'll come back when I think I've come across something that is a little on the difficult side.